What's up, everybody? This is your host, Jackson Mitchell, and we are back with another episode of the Walk On Mentality podcast. This week in the studio, we have a Westchester County legend and the man who took Dallas's bagel scene to the next level, Justin Shugrue. Justin, thank you for joining me, bro.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. So, how are you feeling after this morning?
Yeah, it wasn't actually a long run. It was a fucking fast run.
Yeah, we...
I'm gassed.
Yeah, and you had a full day, too. This morning we did a speed workout. You're training for...
A half
marathon,
yeah.
With the goal to run...
I want to run an hour and 21 minutes, but it's almost unattainable. Like, I'm starting to come to terms with reality that's a really fast pace.
Why do you think it's unattainable?
I just don't... Like, this morning, we were walking on the rests that I should have been running, and I keep on facing moments in my training where, like, I'm definitely cutting some corners. Maybe not unattainable, but definitely within the race that I signed up for. Right. I just need to reevaluate, I think, for the next big race I run and, like, take the training maybe one step further in terms of seriousness, whether it's nutrition, like we were talking about, or stretching, or just getting it to the next level, because I'm hitting a wall where I just can't really, like, get to that next speed.
Right. Now, when you and I were talking about getting in the studio recording this episode, you said running makes you tick. So tell me more about what that means. I was trying to figure out, like, really what does it mean for something to make you tick? But when you say running makes you tick, what does that mean?
It gives me a lot of structure. I think there's, like, a lot of benefits to, like, meditating, but I just can't get into it. Like, I've always wanted to meditate, but, like, I've tried to do, like, transcendental meditation, or, like, try to, like, to have it, like, my brain is just always, like, just going a million miles per hour. So I could never just sit in my own thoughts for minutes, 10 minutes, half hour. But running, especially because I feel like a lot of, maybe this is just my opinion, I don't know if this is true, but, like, I feel like a lot of millennials run alone, and, like, it was kind of an old head thing to do, to, like, run in groups, and, like, now we have AirPods and phones and all these training programs. Like, running has definitely always been meditative, but, like, I always run alone, and I love running with people like you, because it keeps me accountable and makes me realize, like, oh, maybe I'm not that fast, or, like, you know, I can really test out my pace and I can run faster because I'm trying to keep up with somebody. But in terms of how I'm running, 9 times out of 10, Monday through Friday, like, through the week, it's just me and my thoughts. And, like, when you're running, like, sure, when I first start my run, I'm thinking about everything, but, like, eventually you're just breathing, and You're just concentrating on your breath, and you're just thinking about left, right, and where you're going, and how's your pace. And it's kind of that forced kind of, like, I'm not thinking about work or personal life or anything like that. Like, I'm just thinking about my pace, and if I'm lucky, like, how beautiful day it is out, and how nice of an area I'm in. And, like, I feel like that's the closest I've gotten to meditation. So when I say that it makes me tick, it's just, it gives me such a good baseline where I can do that. And I think that's kind of where the addiction part came in for me, where I just now need to run, like, 5 days a week. And if I'm not, like, I get really anxious.
Right. And I think something cool about the way you approach it, too, is that you're not wrapped up in all the metrics and the data. And, I mean, you didn't even wear a watch this morning. I think you had on, like, a Fitbit or something.
I got my phone, but...
Yeah, but it's just different. Like, you're
but
not
I think I should be into the data, because, people who are into the data are typically faster than me. So, like, maybe that's the problem. I don't know.
Maybe. Well, were you always into running? I mean, I know you grew up in the Northeast. Were you a cross-country dude, track star? What was your background like?
I think... the ultimate Austin podcaster, Tim Ferriss. I remember I really started running after I read one of his books, and I'll circle back to that. But in high school, I was running cross country, but it just wasn't the cool sport. I wanted to do the cool sport. I wanted to, like, play lacrosse, or, like, do something that was, like, a sexier sport than, like, cross country, which, let's call a spade, is a lame sport. But I had a natural ability to run, whereas, like, I was, like, gonna be the captain my senior year, and I didn't even, like, want it, and I was definitely the fastest on the team at one point, and I wasn't even really trying. I just had, like, a natural endurance attitude, and I went to a school in Connecticut that was on the Appalachian Trail, so, like, it was beautiful. So I was so spoiled and unappreciative of kind of, like, what I had. But in college, I read one of Tim Ferriss's books, and he made a point about pretty much like you should capitalize on your skills that you have an innate ability for, and don't worry about like fixing the things that you're naturally not good at. And that the difference between those two things is like multiplicative versus addition. And like if you capitalize on what you're good at, you're just gonna get light years ahead of your competition. Whereas if you're trying to like fix the skills that you suck at, like you're never going to have a competitive edge in those things that you just naturally suck at. Like you could maybe learn to do that thing, but you're never going to be a beast in it.
Right.
And I think that clicked with me. I was like, oh, I should have just been running my whole life. And then I was like, the lacrosse thing was so stupid. I like didn't have the natural ability to play that sport. Like I didn't have the frame for it. Like I could run though. And the second that clicked with me, like I think I ran like a 3 hour and 10 minute, like the first marathon I ran. And I just like started like taking it super seriously. And then I just kind of realized like, well, like I'm not trying that hard, but I'm like one of the fastest people I know in these marathons. And now, it's just hard just in, life is to like train, but like I feel better doing it just because I had like that innate ability from the get-go. And who knows, maybe it's biology, maybe it's hardwiring. I'm not sure, but I've always felt like I've had that like long distance runner thing in me.
Yeah. And you said, so when did you start playing lacrosse?
High school? No, middle school.
Okay, so this was something that, or I guess the better question would be then, when did you read that book?
Junior year of college.
Oh, okay. So did you take a break from running at any point during that?
Yeah, for sure.
So you
I stopped. I wasn't doing like any cardio really after high school.
And you were pretty good at lacrosse though, no?
I mean, I played at SMU. Not really. No, nothing. No, I really wasn't. Like I liked it. And I think because I was fast, I had the classic lacrosse thing is like if you suck at lacrosse, they put you at D midi, and like and that's what I was. I was a good D midi, and that's because I could run. Like they could like literally, the whole D midi thing is that like if you get the ball on defense, it's just like give this kid the ball, and he's gonna get you to the offensive side, and then get this guy off the field because he's a liability. So that was like kind of my shtick. And now that I think about it, I was either that or a face-off guy, which is another thing that is just like you're kind of a liability outside of your specific role. So like it totally made sense that like that was what I was doing, but like it took kind of that clicking moment my junior year before I was like, oh man, I'm just a good runner.
Right.
Not that I'm just a good runner, but that's like where my innate ability is.
Right. Now, was that Tim Ferriss book tailored more toward business, or was it just general?
It was the 4 Hour Work Week, which is the most cliche entrepreneurial book. But like, I'm all about that content. I'm like, I can't lie. Like, I read NPR is How I Built This, Tim Ferriss Show.
I love it too.
I mean, I listen to all that stuff. Read all those books. Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. Like, I feel like we're in such a good era right now with podcasts and these, I've never really gotten to like Tony Robbins and stuff like that, but like, there was kind of like, I think kind of the previous era of kind of like self-help, for lack of a better word. Yep. Like, I don't love that term, but that the content is there's just oceans of it now, oceans of it. So you could find nowadays, like if I'm going to drive back to Dallas after this, like I can listen to a podcast and I will about like a specific problem within the restaurant industry that I'm struggling with. And I can find that exact topic and talk to listen to experts that have very similar issues that I have. That's just, it's a cool time to have content like that around.
It's incredible, dude. I was having a conversation recently with somebody about the fact that any information you want is at your fingertips via podcast, YouTube, etc. And when I think about myself as a student in college, like I studied economics, but couldn't have cared less about it. So I was not like super, super curious and trying to get into the weeds around it. I wonder, let's say my degree was in podcasting, if that was a thing, like would I have been utilizing the piss out of all these tools that we have at our disposal now? It's just, there's oceans, like you said. I mean,
that's just the tip of the iceberg. The tools that these kids are getting nowadays are crazy. I mean, they're having like ChatGPT and like all this other stuff. It's not just podcasts. Like we were in like the information age. Like now they're getting like other things are interpreting the information for them and giving them like watered down cliff notes on that, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah. So, you come up in high school playing lacrosse, comes time to decide where you're going to go to college. You're from the East Coast. How did you end up in Dallas at SMU?
The honest answer was really my plan C. My brother Ned went to SMU, and he was the first person to even like in my family. I have no family in Texas.
Okay.
All my family is mostly in the Northeast, some in California, kind of some sprinkled in the United States, but mostly in the Northeast. And I wanted to go to UVA, didn't work out. I thought, all right, maybe I'll go to Washington and Lee. Also didn't work out. But I mean, everything's a blessing in disguise. Like, I'm so happy with how everything worked out. And what I really liked about SMU, and I never really felt like it was a plan C at the time, even though that kind of it was the third option.
Right.
It was cool to go to a university that was in a city, a proper metroplex. So it wasn't like you're going to UVA that has a town, but it's a college town. You're going to, so many colleges in Texas are just all around just a college town. Like, SMU is in Dallas, and the shining star of that is Dallas. And honestly, SMU is kind of like the secondary thing. So like, I fell in love with the city before I really fell in love with SMU, just because I thought it was so cool to be in such a booming metroplex. And that I wasn't really taking like a educated bet on the city when you're applying to colleges, but like in hindsight, it worked out great because DFW is booming, Texas in general is booming, and I'm super happy with landing there.
Yeah, and you said your oldest brother was Ned?
Yes.
You have other siblings?
I have a middle brother, Charlie.
Okay. Now, looking at your parents, your brothers, are there a bunch of entrepreneurs in your family? Are people more corporate, or what is the family dynamics?
No, I don't have anyone in my family that started really their own business. I mean, not in like kind of the more like pure way that I did it. Like, you can get involved in owning equity in a business that isn't necessarily like true entrepreneurship, but I think it was just kind of my obsession with all those, the entrepreneurial story, that kind of gave me like a more pure entrepreneurial backstory for myself. But my dad worked in the movie business. He passed away at my senior year of college. Senior year of high school. But he worked in film. He was a film distributor.
Okay. And what about mom?
Mom currently lives in New York. She's working in administration, and she's at the time wasn't working when my dad was around, but now she's back to work.
Okay, so you go to SMU and you get a finance degree. So as you're going through college, is your thought, I'm gonna get a job in investment banking, eventually go PE, and take that route, which a lot of our classmates at SMU did. A lot of people just in general will take that route. Was that what you thought you were going to do?
Yeah, I think that was just because I was mostly drinking the Kool-Aid of like Cox, the business school at SMU. A lot of students, rightfully so. If you're smart and ambitious, it has a very clear pipeline. It's really competitive, but it's a great career path, and I think I wasn't necessarily passionate about finance, but I definitely saw people that I was like, oh, this guy's really smart, and I respect him. And people I really respected were going down that path. So I think just by association, like I wanted to go down that path, and I thought that like kind of my sophomore, junior year, I thought that I was doing that. All the while, when I couldn't land the internship I wanted, I'd go work in restaurants. So it wasn't really a career move, but I was getting restaurant experience kind of like as I was thinking about the finance career.
Was that on purpose?
No, that was just,
You did a job.
Yeah, most people, the money's good in restaurants. I started as a bar back and a busboy at a really nice restaurant in kind of Westchester County, New York, called the Inn of Pound Ridge, and that kind of by accident became like my foundation in hospitality, because it really was a super well-known, respected restaurant. I mean, I waited tables for Martha Stewart and Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively, and it was like a Richard Gere. It was just a super star-studded restaurant because it was a 3 Michelin star chef. It wasn't his 3 Michelin star restaurant, but it was a 3 Michelin star chef that was opening up kind of like a farm-to-table concept, and I was there from pretty much day one. I came like a month after they initially opened up, and I was just, young, ambitious. I just told them pretty much every day, like, whatever you guys want me to do, I'll do, which was just because I wanted more shifts, because I was home for the summer. I was like, if you guys aren't putting me to work like 5-6 days a week, then I don't know what I'm doing. Then I kind of became just like a resource for them, because if they had any odd job, they'd call me, which I really by accident learned everything about the restaurant, because I was in the front of house, I was in the back of house, I was with administration, I was in at the farm and back, like just learning everything about the business, and just enjoying it and just actually enjoying it. And then I would go, maybe work so hard to get some internship and then fucking hate it. And then I didn't click for a while that like, wow, I love this and I hate this. It was almost like I love this thing I'm doing for money because I need money, and then I'm building this career that I hate. Like in hindsight, like it's obvious that I was learning kind of what would become kind of a passion for hospitality. But for a while, kind of going into my junior year, I was still telling myself like investment banker, investment banker, investment banker.
So what about the experience at that restaurant? Obviously, you just said that you got to see all parts of the business, how it ran, how it operated. I've always thought about working in like a coffee shop or a restaurant, and it just being this environment where you're getting to connect with people around things that everyone enjoys.
Yeah.
Coffee, food, conversation. Like just kind of the pinnacle of the opportunity to have a great experience.
Yeah.
What was it about working in that space that really caught you when you were first getting into it?
I think in general hospitality, I don't know about that space in particular, but I think I like this about all restaurants, whether it's a cafe or a fine dining establishment or a bagel shop or a taco shop. Like it's just, you're giving something to somebody that just makes them happy immediately. It's literal sustenance, and and you can see them react and enjoy it. And it's just the most direct value exchange. Here's money, here's something, here's sustenance. And, it's such a cool business because so many people work in, jobs that they don't actually see the finished product through. But the restaurant is just from A to Z, you get to see everything kind of happen right there. And in particular, that restaurant, it was a real fine dining establishment, and it was a really complicated operation. So like I really got to see behind the behind the kitchen, behind every aspect of it, a very complicated dance. It's like this giant play that's going on, and there's all these different characters in it. And it just works. It's almost like, when you go to a Broadway show and, they raise the curtain and from the beginning to the end, like everything is flowing perfectly. And it really is beautiful when a really impressive fine dining establishment is doing everything perfect through the motions. And of course, it's just like a show. Behind the scenes, nothing's perfect. It's a fucking mess. It's a disaster. The kitchen, the chef's throwing plates. Somebody dropped the whole tray of food. Like they're out of steak. They're out of something. Someone's breaking glass. But just like a Broadway show, like the customer doesn't see that. You have to keep the dance going. You have to keep the show going. And like that kind of the orchestration of it, I thought was really cool. And also the people that I worked with, I really enjoyed. People were just, more salt of the earth, not like, the finance bros, just like people who are really great to get a drink with after work.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I don't know if this will land at all, but for some reason, as you were saying that, I just thought about the process. And in running, it's the same way. You just have to be like in that process.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if there's some sort of level of connection there between running making you tick, you enjoying it still to this day, and then you having built your business. But that's really cool and makes total sense.
Yeah.
So you end up going through college, you graduate. I guess let me back up. At what point in time did you decide, you know what, I'm gonna build something?
Yeah. I hated an internship once. So I finally got the internship that I thought I wanted, and it wasn't really, I was kind of kidding myself. Like it wasn't even really like it was like a stepping stone to the next internship I want. And I was just getting jaded by like, in finance, oftentimes you have to kind of have like a nepotistic benefit to like get a good internship, especially coming from a school like SMU. That's a good school, but it's not Harvard. It's not Stanford. It's a good school, but it's not the best of the best. So if you're going to go work at Goldman Sachs, you have to go really fight for it coming from a school like SMU. And I just knew I was never going to get that, because I had like a good GPA, but not a 4.0. And I would see people that had like some sort of nepotistic edge or a leg up above me, and I would just be like, fucking shit, like it's going to drive me crazy for the rest of my life. And I was getting jaded by it. All the while, I just hated the job in general when I was actually there in the first place. And after that summer, I did some soul searching, and I really kind of came to terms with the fact that like, okay, I love the restaurant, and this was in between my junior and senior year. I love the restaurant industry. I don't love finance, even though that's what I'm getting a degree in. I'm going to go back to school and finish that. And kind of it was fall of my senior year that I determined maybe a bagel shop would make sense. And I think at the time I was kind of reading some those books that were previously mentioned, like Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 and Tim Ferriss' 4-Hour Work Week. And I kind of was coming up with the idea of like a deli. It wasn't even a bagel shop at the time. It was like a deli. Because I really wanted, a bacon, egg, and cheese. And that was kind of the idea. And Goff's Burgers on Hillcrest burnt down that summer. And that was like kind of like my Phoenix moment of like from the ashes of Goff's could come Shug's. And I was going to watch it burn down. I was going to get that property. That was the pipe dream. I reached out to a guy named Hunter Pond who opened up East Hampton and Hudson House. And I knew nothing about the guy other than the fact that he opened up 2 brands that were Northeastern themed. So I thought like a bagel shop or a deli would be Northeastern themed. Maybe he should open up a bagel shop. Hire me. I'll be the sweat equity guy. You can kind of figure out the stuff that I don't understand. And it was a blessing in disguise because I owe him the world because he believed in me. He just really respected that I was just like, coming into his office and telling him about something I believed in. But like I said, blessing in disguise. He didn't believe in the bagel shop. He just thought Dallas didn't want bagels. Like he didn't think it was going to work.
Wow.
And also at the end of the day, he's a Dallasite guy. He went to Highland Park. He went to Tech. So he didn't know really what I was trying to describe to him. So I don't blame him for that.
Right.
There's a lot of Texans who don't really understand kind of like what a traditional bagel shop is supposed to be like until Shug's opened up and they're like, oh, okay, now I get it. Like, how is it different than Benny's? Like our menu or Einstein's, another typical Texas bagel shop. They're, our menus at face value are identical. We have bacon, egg, and cheeses, and you have bagels with cream cheese. They're not any different. But like if you actually experience it, it's very different. So he was the first kind of spark because he just said, I just didn't understand, like, how do you get money for this? How do you fundraise, whether it's a loan or equity? How do you get that money? That seems incredibly opaque. How do you sign a lease? At the time I was, I think 21. Like, how do I do this as a 21-year-old? Like, without having like, some sort of trust fund situation or some sort of like partner that was going to figure it out for you. And he, didn't become like a partner who's going to figure it out for me. He pretty much just put wind in my sails, like, no, you could do this. And he believed in me. And he just provided clarity in areas where there's a ton of opaqueness. And not even just clarity, but also like, if someone says like, oh, to fundraise for a restaurant, you can issue a Regulation D with the SEC and do a private placement offering and raise money from family and friends. And, that's great. Write that down, whatever the fuck that means. But like, that doesn't mean anything until it's like, no, introduce me to the attorney that can draft that document. Like that's what he did. Like he would introduce me to the attorney that could draft that document. Then all of a sudden, like the stuff that was on paper was like, oh no, I can actually do this. And then after I had that conversation with him, I called my mom. I was like, this is what I'm doing. I was really committed to it from that day forward and honestly never really looked back since then. It was really that moment till now that it's been kind of pushing, for on this kind of vision quest for, creating Shugs.
Wow. I'm mind blown that you went to that guy and said he should open a bagel shop and that you were going to be like the sweat equity guy. Yeah. That's unbelievable to me. Yeah. What was your mom's reaction?
I think she could tell by how I was talking that I was very serious. And at the time I was being really stupid. I was just being like, oh, I'm like, what's the point of finishing college? Like, and she's like, Justin, you're like a semester away. Like, just finish college. So I did. Right. She's always been incredibly supportive. Because at the time it was pretty ridiculous. I was just like that guy that wanted to open up a bagel shop. Like, it's just an idea. And there was a lot. That was 2017, actually 2016 when I met Hunter. And Shug's opened up in June of 2020. So there was a long period of time where I was just like, yeah, like Justin's opened up a bagel shop, like whatever the fuck that means. Like, but like I still like I had a good like marathon mentality about it of like, no, like it's it's gonna take a lot of work. I got to chip away at it over time, and like I'll eventually get there. And I eventually did. So like I did have the big moment of like, wow, it's here, it's happening, and then the realization that's actually making money, and that's been huge. I'm still kind of in that moment. I mean, we opened up 3 years ago. Now that's 2023. So. I'm still kind of absorbing kind of like what have I created and what am I supposed to do next with it.
Dude, It's so sick to sit here across from you and hear you talk about it. I remember, it's hilarious. We went to college together. I don't actually remember meeting you in college. I only remember meeting you when we went on a 12-mile run in a humid summer day with Sean.
Yeah.
It's really cool to hear you talk about that process. And so, 2017, you start building this thing. How did you have money coming in? Where were you living? Also, did you know you wanted to stay in Dallas?
Yeah, because I think the void in the market was Dallas. That was a big part of the pitch. It was like, yes, a bagel shop could work in a lot of places outside of New York, but Dallas has tons of Northeastern transplants, and like I can't speak for every city, but I know it's going to work here. Mm-hmm. And it was like about not reinventing the wheel. It was just like kind of like pick up a bagel shop from New York and with a claw and just drop it in DFW, and like that's the business. Don't overcomplicate things. Yeah.
So with that, like you mentioned that. So then 2017 to 2020, you're building. What's that process like for building a brick and mortar that requires massive equipment to make the bagels, cook the bagels, building out the interior design of the bagel shop, getting the coolers, the stuff to hang on the walls, everything, hiring staff, like tell me about that process.
Yeah, I mean, so to pay my bills, like while I was kind of going through that process, I waited tables at 2 restaurants. One is called Abacus, which is no longer around, and Hudson House. So I was just paying, I was a server. Mm-hmm. And then there's a lot of elements in kind of the build up process. But first was like build a business plan. Because you can't really ask anybody for money unless you can slide across the table a business plan and be like, this is what I'm going to do. So I built a business plan, which I think it's really good not to overthink that, because I think so many people get like caught up in that. Like I really think a business plan could be like 5 sentences, like because it's you kind of have to have that naivete and you don't know what you're going into. So like I think we're kind of in this weird era where like there's so many entrepreneurs nowadays and like they're too stressed about like pitching and less about like you're walking into the unknown. And if you're I always like just to be very direct with anybody I was asking money before, just like, hey, like this could change, but this is the high level plan. Like this is the very simple plan, and I'm the guy who's gonna get it done, and I'm not bullshitting you. That being said, I can make a counter argument that like just doing homework it just shows you care to the investor. Right. But I kind of I think a lot of investors are like, oh, can I try a bagel? And I didn't know how to bake bagels. Like I didn't know anything about it really at the time. But in my head I felt like, well, I'd be lying to you if I baked something out of the equipment in my kitchen, because like it's going to be so different when I get the equipment. It's going to be different flour because there's different suppliers that you can buy as a retail individual or a commercial company, and there's different equipment you're baking with. So I would use different flour and different equipment, and it would be a completely different product, and it just kind of felt like phony if I was going to like bake them bagels. Right. So I was waiting tables to pay my bills, and then once I had a business plan, I put together the fundraising documents and started to raise some money from family and friends. And the most obvious criticism I kept on receiving is like, you need to go, bake some bagels. So as I was fundraising, I ended up raising $300,000 from family and friends, college buddies, mostly family members, really tight group of people I knew very well. And it was, these are donations. People were not expecting to get that money back. There was just, which is I think how you should look into a family and friends investment. Like if it works out, amazing. If it doesn't, you're not going to like blame the guy. So it means a lot for everybody who really, ponied up and put in the money and,
believed in it.
I really believed in it. And I try my best to make sure they're really well taken care of. So I put a pin in fundraising and worked in some bagel shops in the Northeast, near my mom's place. Got some experience, did some, you could call it like apprenticeships, but at the end of the day, these are like, it's not like these are Michelin star restaurants. These are just some gritty Long Island bagel shops. So like they don't have apprentices. They just walk in there, and I was just telling them I'll work the worst shifts. I'll do it for free. I'll bake with the baker that shows up at 2 a.m. I'll do that for as long as you need me to during your peak summer busy hours. And it was really endearing as to how many bagel shop owners were like really willing to just, show me behind the curtain. And very often I would just quickly learned, like, oh, you guys' recipes are all the same. Not only are recipes all the same, you guys use the same equipment, you buy the same equipment, you guys, it's all the same, similar operation here, which is why, it's not like you go to New York and there's one good bagel shop. It's the saying, it's like there's a lot of good bagel shops in Connecticut, New Jersey, New York. And I quickly realized kind of what made them all tick. Went back to Dallas and then continued to fundraise. Quickly realized I rang the towel on what money I could raise. I thought I needed $700,000 to open up the bagel shop. I only got $300 from family and friends, which honestly was pretty, for how young I was. In hindsight, it's incredible that I was able to raise that. But I needed more money, and then I went down the SBA loan path. So I applied for an SBA loan, Small Business Administration, and that was an incredible education on like equity versus debt, and what it is like to take out a big loan, and what's it like to raise money from family and friends, and what are the different risk factors of both, the pros and cons of both. But that loan was leaned against my mom's one and only primary residence. So if I didn't pay back that loan, they would take my mom's house. So I had a very real but different fires under my ass, which was, you burn reputations with people that, wasted money on you if you don't pay them back. And, if you don't pay off this loan, they're going to put a lien against my mom's house. So that was the money element of it. And as I was fundraising, it's a big kind of like chicken and egg situation where like you go to a landlord and of course you have to, tell them like, no, I'm good for the money. I got money. Like we're good to go, as you're kind of like turning around and like, you're like, fuck, like we're like only halfway there. Like I need more money. But no one's going to let you sign a lease, especially, no credit, no reputation. They're taking a big risk on me. You don't want to tell them that, like, not only are they taking a big risk on a non-franchised young restaurant that he doesn't even have the money yet. So you kind of have to fake it till you make it in those situations. And there's a lot of that, same thing with the investors. They'd be like, oh, do you have the lease yet? I'd be like, yeah, I got the lease. And then I'd like turn and go talk to the landlord and be like, all right, like, do we have the lease yet? Is it good?
Dude, you got it out the mud.
Yeah.
2 a.m. worst shift, summer peak hours at the bagel shop, grinding.
Yeah.
Incredible. Keep going.
Yeah. And then got the money, got the lease through a lot of kind of trickery, and right when things were, figured out a good bid for construction, got quotes on equipment because I already knew what equipment I wanted from those bagel shops I worked at. Worked with an architect and an engineer with actually making the permits and the plans and everything, and then with a good general contractor with actually building out the space. This is kind of going into like 2018, 2019. I think around 2019. Got the keys to the property, Lover's Egg Roll. The previous tenant, went in, looked like Chernobyl in there. It was like decrepit, and got to work. And then obviously, the pandemic. So we opened up in June 2020 when the sky was falling, and at that point, I was 3 years of pushing this boulder uphill. And like people would, I think it would be so ridiculous when someone would ask me like, oh, like you gonna give up? It's kind of like, even if I was cut from the cloth of someone who gives up, which I'm not, but like, how the fuck could I give up now? I already got the loan, I already got the money, I already got the lease. Like, there's no way that I'm just gonna like take a back seat on this and fold. So really, I didn't even have a choice. And also in hindsight, I was getting texts of condolences being like, I'm so sorry. This is obviously going to be a disaster. It's restaurant Armageddon out there. It's the end of the world. Grab and go places like bagel shops did better in the pandemic than they did in normalcy. That wasn't clear in spring of 2020. In spring of 2020, it was just the end of the world. But it actually was another blessing in disguise. Like, it actually, like, we were the one happy story during a time when you opened up a newspaper and it was just an obituary of restaurants. So you would just like see like restaurant closure, but like Shug's is opening. And I think that's why we had such a huge line out the door on day one, because people had to stand 6 feet apart, but also because like we also like had the only place in town that was opening. So I think if you remember back what like June 2020 was like, people were just eager for something to do. Like people were just so bored at that point. Yeah, because it was like June 2020 was like 3 months in. And that was like the period when everyone's like, oh my God, this is actually going to be a minute. Like this isn't like a little, like we're like 2-week lockdown that everyone was talking about. Like this is months. So I think people were just desperate for like social distancing type things they could do. And going to a bagel shop is the perfect example. It's grab and go. We didn't have to change the business that much. Restaurants had to like change their whole operations. We were so blessed that the business that I already built actually kind of worked in a pandemic world. So we just opened up June 2020. It was really just gangbusters since then, like just line out the door every single day. And we've just been kind of making incremental improvements on our operations since then.
Yeah. So I'm curious, how much does all the equipment and everything that went into that first spot, like how much was that all worth? And I'm also curious, how did you come to select that location?
Yeah. In terms of how much it costs, where that $700,000 went, actually.
Was it $700,000?
Yeah,
okay.
It was $700,000. The majority of that's construction. I think 50% around that's construction. So just turning Lover's Egg Roll into an empty Shug shell. Not necessarily a finished product, but just a shell. With hood system, with floors, with everything. And then the next thing was getting the equipment. That's the next big thing. That was like another like $100,000 or so. And then there's you gotta have some cash in the like a pillow when you open up to run your first payroll, to buy your first inventory. Tons of permitting fees. Tons of pay for your architect, pay for your engineer. All those small things kind of add up and end up being the difference between those two. But the big two are definitely build out's the big number one, and the number two is equipment.
And when you first started, did you hire people immediately, or what was the building process for building a staff?
Yeah.
And how challenging was it to get a staff that you could trust? We talked about that a little bit this morning. Like having people on your team who you trust and who trust you, that's huge.
Yeah, I got really lucky. I think in the early days when I was just alone, I looked at it from kind of like most important, like I got to get the most important guy first, and then I'll look at the second most important. And, the first person I got was this guy named Joe, who I was his busser. I was his busboy, essentially, when I was working at that restaurant. And I could just tell we got along, and I just knew he would crush it. And he was willing to he was one of the investors, those family and friends. He was willing to take the leap of faith and move down to Dallas from New York, and he just fit the bill perfectly, and to this day is still like my right-hand guy. And then after that, figure out who our baker is. So I reached out to I think I actually reached out to a recruiter who found him. He was, I think, managing at Popeyes at the time. This guy named Kevin Chavez, who to this day is like our head baker. And kind of slowly over time, I think when we got closer to opening, we started to do more true, because in restaurants at the end of the day, like a lot of these jobs are hourly. And the people who are looking for hourly jobs aren't like, submitting resumes for jobs 6 months down the road. They just want a job today. Mm-hmm. So we waited until we were pretty close to open to get the majority of the staff. Ended up getting, a full staff for how busy I thought we were going to be. We were prepared for being, I think, successful according to what I thought was going to be successful. And then we were just far busier than that. So I was just nonstop working. We were all nonstop working for that first summer. I think we only had maybe, it's a lot of people, but like 9 or 10 or 11 or 12 people on our payroll. Now we have 30, but we were doing like similar volumes back then, but just across a third, everyone was just working 3 times as hard. But that was kind of like the fun and the panic of the restaurant business, of just flying by the seat of your pants and just trying to keep up with the demand.
Yeah. What are some of the most important things to you from a leading perspective, like as the leader of the organization?
Like what I look for in other people, or what I try to emulate myself?
I think more so what you try to emulate yourself in, empowering your people, different ways to view different situations.
Yeah.
You name it.
Yeah. I think it's really hard to say this, because I wish I had more opportunity for it, and I'm going to struggle for it as I grow. But I think it's really important for someone in my position, founder, owner, the Shug, for lack of a better term, to just always be willing to do the work and operate. I think there's a lot of owners that like have a disdain for operations. Like they never get their hands dirty. They wouldn't clear a plate. They would never do anything. They would never like, I picked up puke from like homeless chicks on our patio. Like and I literally remember like, not that it was happy to see that, but like I love when that shit happens so that I have a moment to prove that like I'm not above anything, like, and just that I'm willing to do something. I think that's really important to show that from a leadership perspective, because there's just always, I think that's typically kind of where not any company goes wrong, where just like, people in the high up think they're better and there's things that are below them. But at the end of the day, like what is most important, especially in a restaurant, are the people who operate the restaurant. And I might not be operating a restaurant as much as I was back in 2020. Now I'm worried about growth. I'm worrying about infrastructure. I'm worrying about possible second locations. I'm worrying about build out. I'm worrying about kind of, building the brand and bigger picture stuff right now. But at the end of the day, none of that happens if the person operating the restaurant isn't doing a good job. So like I really stand on the shoulders of what they're accomplishing and the sweat they're putting into the bagel shop, and making sure they feel like they're well taken care of and financially taken care of is super, super important. And I think you can pay someone a lot and that helps, but more importantly, you have to show them that like you actually meet, like they are the most important thing, because they are the most important thing. I can't speak for every industry because I don't know every industry. I only really know the restaurant industry, but in the restaurant industry, I think it's just so important to make sure that the people who are on the floor working the restaurant are seen at all times.
That's servant leadership at its finest. So you open the first location, you're rocking out in 2020. First year's insane. There's been no slowing down. It's time to go, not from 0 to 1, but the next step. What is it like working to scale a restaurant business? And, when you think about the vision for Shug's long term, what do you see?
I think it's, 1 to 2 is a very particular journey. I don't know about scaling beyond that. That's going to be my next, big challenge. So I'm only going to really speak to 1 to 2. I think the challenge is, taking a step back, first of all. I really struggled with that for a very long time, of like taking a vacation or like just simply leaving town. And I think the answer as to how that works is just, as long as you have good people you trust, you have to show them that you trust them. And if you don't show them that you trust them, then like they're just going to feel micromanaged and unappreciated. That I don't think they're good at their job without me micromanaging them. So I've really been blown away by kind of times where I take a step back. People are really, really impressive. So I think kind of scaling is just making sure you have good people and you trust them and you let them kind of flap their wings without micromanaging them. And then, that kind of just, as I transition from being an operator into someone who's more about scaling, I just need to make sure that I keep that servant leadership attitude of like, my job is to provide them tools to succeed. I need to constantly be making their job easier, asking how can I help them, and my job is, they might not necessarily know what tools they need to succeed, but is to present them, whether it's just a software or a different piece of equipment or repairing something that they didn't know was about to break, constantly from behind the scenes, just pouring jet fuel on their flame and making sure that they're really, really taken care of. So I really am proud of the infrastructure that we have right now, because I know we're going to have no issue opening up the second location. I think we've done a good enough job as to, elevating good people, making sure that we have the infrastructure in place that it's going to work over at the second location. And also just constantly elevating, take another big step back of like, what is a restaurant? Customers only come, I think, in a restaurant if it's 2 things. It needs to be fun and it needs to be delicious. Is the actual attending of the restaurant a fun experience, a pleasant experience where you got good hospitality and it wasn't a mess and you enjoyed it, and maybe you saw a cashier they remembered your order, and the creamer station is all open with the half and half and whole milk and sugars and all that, and you have everything that's clean, chairs are pushed in, and everything's just well organized, and it just, you kind of see that kind of Broadway show element again. You walk in and it's a good experience. And then at the end of the day, it's a restaurant. is what you're eating delicious? And I've been trying my best, and my team has been doing an incredible job of just making sure that we're just upping our game every single month, because, we can up our game. I still think we can have a much better product. We can have a better bagel. We can have a better ordering system. We can be faster. I don't think that means you have to necessarily be like cracking the whip and telling everyone like, oh, we need to be so much faster and we're not good enough yet. It's not that we're not good enough. It's just that we can be better. There's a very different kind of attitude between those two things. And that's been, I think, super important for us as scaling, is that as we open up a second location, it's going to be on tip on everyone's tongue. It's going to be on the tip of everyone's tongue that like, oh, they're not what they used to be. You're all of a sudden, I hear it all the time from people like, I don't want to go to a restaurant that has like more than one location, or like, oh, like it's a local mom and pop shop. And it's funny because like all these people that supported Shugs in our early days for being kind of the local SMU grad for opening up and being successful. I could imagine a lot of them also were like, he's getting too greedy. Like, it's funny because like, no, like I haven't really changed. Like I'm just trying to, grow the business and provide economic opportunity for my people and just take this to the next level. But that's the biggest challenge, is that like you're no longer that one kind of lightning in a bottle restaurant. You're now growing. So I think the key to making sure that people aren't talking about it in that sense is just making sure you've upped your game, so that like when someone walks into Shug's number 2 and they're like, it's not what it used to be, I can just look them confidently in the eyes and be like, yeah, we're better. We're not what we used to be. We've upped our game significantly, which is, we just kind of have to continue to do, like, as we get better and better.
What have been some of the challenges that you faced in opening the second location? And then on the flip side of that, what have been the things that you've just kind of breezed through because you've done it before?
I think when we opened up the first location, we were jumping off the cliff and just not knowing what was down there. Now we know exactly what's down there. There's no curveball we're going to face that we haven't faced before. Equipment has broken in the past and has been disastrous. We know who to call now. We know where to get the fix. The equipment. In fact, we have backups of everything ready to go. So everything's on standby for every kind of disaster that we've faced in the past. So they're just no longer going to be disasters. Scheduling, when you go from no employees to having to make a 30-person full-time staff, that's hard. But when we're going from 30 employees and we're turning down applicants every single day, going to 60 employees is actually honestly fairly easy. You start just answering the phone, and then you just ask everyone like, hey, does everyone who wants to go to which location, and do you have any family or friends that want a job, and they can help keep each other accountable. So staffing has been easier for sure. Being prepared for unknowns has been easier for sure, just because we know the unknowns. I think with the second location, it's like building a new prototype though, because we were in line at a strip mall for number 1, which is one type of prototype, and then we're going standalone drive-through with the second one, which is completely different. So I think building out that property was definitely a big challenge, because that's a curveball I haven't seen before. Like, how do you handle a drive-through? How do you make Shugs work within 1,500 square feet? The first location was 3,000. So like, there's some things you can copy and paste, but like when you're cutting the whole property in half, you can't copy and paste that. You have to reinvent like how you're going to go about your procedures. But they're also, that's a good opportunity too, because there's a lot of procedures that we have at number 1 that were built out of naivete that just don't work. We just should have done things differently. And now I can learn from all those mistakes and fix all of them.
You're gonna need they're gonna need to build out another lane on Lemon for the drive-through line.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, we're gonna do online order pickup only, which is an interesting bet, because most customers are very used to going to a drive-through and placing an order over an intercom. And I'm very bullish on technology in restaurants and online ordering and kind of the Starbucks checkout procedure, where you just place an order on an app and you go there and you say your name and you pick it up. I think that's going to be, as people kind of realize, like, that's such an easy, awesome process. Like, people are going to want that more. And for this, I'm so blessed that Shugs oftentimes has a line. It's a champagne problem, but it is a real problem. I wouldn't be my own customer some weekends? Who wants to wait in that line, especially if you're hungover or you have a place to be? It's really hard. So in a kind of an attempt to be my own customer, I know if we have a second location that has a drive-through that's online order pickup, it's going to be wildly efficient. Sure, maybe 2/3 of our customers want a traditional talk box drive-through experience. But the 1/3 of the customer is going to fucking love that experience. And like, those are your people that you need to really support. And I think eventually, just because of how I just think about the industry's heading, those 2/3 will adapt. They'll learn, and it's just going to be a better procedure. No bumper to bumper traffic, no line. If I'm blessed enough to have the equivalent of the demand of the second location as I had at the first.
Yeah, I really like that. I'm just thinking of myself, and if I could just order it, pull up, grab it, and leave, would love to.
Yeah.
I also love the human interaction aspect, but
yeah.
I think to your point, like, there's plenty of people who just want that boom on the go, going to the kids' soccer game or golf or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
What's your go-to order?
I think growing up, I'd get a toasted onion bagel with butter. That was like my childhood thing. Very simple.
Yeah.
And now it's like a spicy Shug. I'll get like a bacon, egg, and cheese with a hash brown, hot sauce, pepper jack cheese. Depending on the day, I get it on like a sesame bagel.
And then I've noticed you just on the go lately, and it's hilarious because, you're trying to bagel everywhere you go.
Yeah.
How dope is it that your market research is trying bagels?
Yeah, honestly, it's dope as fuck. Yeah. It's great. I love going to other cities and just like trying other products, and I try my best to like just be a straight shooter, and like if someone has a better bagel than me, I like to like tell people like, this is a better bagel than Shug's. And I'm like, literally, we just did a big trip where we flew a lot of the management from Shug's up to New York, literally expensed it and put them up in a hotel, just because like, it's hard for someone who was born and raised in Texas to get, not maybe lazy at Shug's, because like, yeah, we're the best in town. And like, honestly, I think so too. I think we are the best in town. We're not the best. We really aren't. So it's like almost to like humble everybody. It was good. Truly, like it justifies the expense, like flying up these managers, like, no, like try these bagels, like we could there's a much higher ceiling than you think. And how cool that's like, Shug's employees are getting flown up and getting put up in a hotel to go to taste bagels. Like I want that to be a perk at Shug's forever, is that like, because that's the only way we're going to ever continue to up our game forever, kind of like to that point of like how you scale. You have to just constantly up your game. So like I just need to have a system in place that like our key people and our managers and everyone who works at Shug's has the opportunity to know that like, yeah, we're good, but don't get too comfortable. Like we could be a lot better. And maybe one day someone will come to town, whether it's Dallas or Austin or another state, that opens up a bagel shop near Shug's that like it is better. And like that's the day that we got lazy, and that's the day that we weren't paying attention and like not aware of us having ability to up our game.
Yeah. What do you think the best bagel in New York City is?
I really like Utopia is a really good bagel. It's in Queens. Tompkins Square Bagel is an excellent bagel. Yeah. The current cool kid in town is this place called Pop-Up Bagels, but it's very different. They don't, no sandwiches. I think it's like it's so different than Shug's, because like Shug's is all about the sandwich experience, and I think their perspective is like, oh, like only bagels, and we're gonna make them as fresh as possible. Like if you're buying a bag of bagels, they're gonna be out of the oven 5 minutes ago. Trying to think of some other ones. And then my childhood favorites are just some small hole-in-the-wall places. Because I never really grew up in like the 5 boroughs, like New York City proper. I was in Westchester County. There was a place called Hand Rolled Bagels in Rye, New York.
Top tier.
Yeah, that was the best.
Man, that's really cool. That's that just goes to show what you just said. I mean, don't get too comfortable, and like you're actually putting in, I don't know how to best say this. It's like the proof is in the pudding, I guess, that you're trying to be the best of the best. Like you're flying your people up to do that. That's really cool. So earlier you mentioned the word endurance, and I just hung on to that and was thinking, what has endurance meant in the entrepreneurial business building sense for you?
I think I think we witnessed in the pandemic the great, what was it called? Like when everyone quit their jobs at the same time. It was the great something. I forgot it.
Yeah.
The great resignation. Like people change jobs all the time nowadays. And like I committed when I met Hunter in like 2016 that like this is going to take some time. And I chose my path a long time ago. And I think that kind of endurance kind of like, yeah, like not every day is going to it's going to start feeling really repetitive. And there are periods when I was at Shug's and I was like, I just feel like I'm going through the motions. But I think that is kind of where that marathon runner attitude kind of like, you got to snap out of it quicker than you even realize it. That you can't like get tired of like the monotony of it. Like you have to understand that like it's a slow chipping away at kind of making progress. And like you can't even like show that like that monotony is kind of like, you need to like be kind of like when you run, like, you know, it was, I think we were on like our fifth sprint today and like you were talking, like you were getting after it. And like, that's what you kind of need to do is kind of have that attitude of like, when it gets harder, like, no, that's when you go. When I ran cross country at Kent, my high school, there's a hill called Gutbuster, and Gutbuster it's a 5K, so it was on mile 2. Gutbuster was like in our league of high schools, it was known to just be this ridiculous hill. Mm-hmm. Like just it makes no sense. Like to this day, I went to my high school's 10-year reunion recently, and I saw Gutbuster, and it's like that steep, and it's like not short. It's like a full like 400 yard just of that. Ugh. And I just remember I was good at running because I was really good at when I got to the top of Gutbuster of like, that's when I would sprint. Like I would get to the top of it and like, because it was humiliating to someone you passed. Right. Like if you pass someone and then kind of laugh at them, like after you got past that hill, they're not picking up their pace. They're going to be like, this kid's like sick. Like I can't do that. And that's always kind of like, I think that's kind of been a good analogy to like how I try to approach work is like right when you go to like a really tough week, like that's the moment you need to just push even harder and just be like an advocate for everyone to be like, yep, like, come on guys, like we got this. And because it is discouraging to also your competition when they're like, yeah, this guy's sick. Like, how the hell does he do this? And you're like, yeah, I am sick. Like, I don't, like, I'm truly like sick in the head, man. Like, I just don't know how to stop. And they can't compete with that.
I love that. And I think that's super important to hear you say, because like we talked about earlier, knowing who Justin Shugrue is, at least to somebody like me, makes Shugs even that much more appealing beyond the fact that, in my opinion, it's a phenomenal bagel. Like, phenomenal. And I love bagels, and it's hilarious to think about growing up going to Einstein's. Like, that was my bagel joint growing up, was Einstein's. And they're really not in the same conversation from my point of view. So I love that analogy, and it's so true. Like, when the times get tough is when you really got to lean in and push.
Yeah.
So, you know, I always ask my guests, do you have a piece of advice that you would leave the listeners with, or a mantra that you live by?
Yeah, I mean, I think I actually ended on the perfect note, that Gutbuster analogy. Yeah. Like, that's kind of a mantra that I go by very often, is just kind of that concept. I haven't found a good way to put it into words because it's a long story, but like the idea of like, if you have a really rough period, whether it's a week or a day or an hour, like, and if you can kind of brainwash yourself to know that like right when you get through it, don't take a break. Like, in fact, triple your pace. Like, you just need to get through that, because that's the time. The second you slow down, it's gonna fuck with you. So that analogy of like, you know, if you're ever in a hill in your life and, you know, the second you kind of come over the curve, sprint.
I love it. And I think it's almost, I kind of hear a little bit of the first time you quit, every time after that it gets a lot easier. So if instead of quitting, when you get to the end of that tough time, you can accelerate and go to the next level, then it's only going to make you better off for every time you face another hard time in the future.
Yeah.
Well, Justin, man, I appreciate you doing this. This was awesome, coming down, getting the work in, and then getting in the studio. I mean, this has been really cool. So thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And to the listeners, thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Walk On Mentality podcast, and we will see y'all on the next one.